Hi, everybody. Welcome to this webinar. My name is Flavia, and I'm here with Kyle. We'll be starting in just a couple of minutes. Let's just do a very quick check. Can you all hear what I'm saying? So please just type yes on the chat if you can hear what I'm saying, please. Just wait 30 seconds to make sure everybody can hear me before we spend like 30 minutes talking and realize nobody can hear a thing. Yes, okay, great. So now I'm gonna ask Kyle to say something and you just type hello, just to make sure that you can hear him okay. So Kyle.
Hi folks, just making sure you can hear me as well now.
So just type hello if you could hear him okay. I know this is a bit boring, but it's good to know. Hello, hello, brilliant. Okay, so everybody can hear us. So thank you so much for being here. We will start this webinar with a very quick presentation on Seneca, who is the host of this webinar, and then Kyle will start his presentation. Just a few information before we start. We're all on YouTube, you know that already, and all the interaction will be via chat. So just type anything that you want to type. Obviously, be respectful towards other people. But if you have any questions, type your questions. If you have any comments, if you want to share resources, if you want to share your own experience about something that Kyle's been saying, please do. The more interaction we have, the better, because we don't see each other on these YouTube live streams, but we can still talk to each other and share experiences and make this as productive as we can. So any questions that you have, type on the chat, comments, experiences, resources, anything, as long as it's nice and polite, please do share. The more, the better. So ask questions. Kyle likes questions. So any questions that you have, just please type, and I'm going to ask them all of the questions at the end after the talk. So we're going to be doing this very quick Seneca presentation, and then the talk, and then a Q&A session. So I'll be writing down all of the things that you have asked during the talk, and then ask Kyle all of them in the end. Okay, so the more, the better. Second thing is that everybody who watched this webinar is entitled to a certificate. So if you want your certificate, some people don't, but if you do, send me an email. I'm putting it on the chat here. Yep. So send me an email, tell me that you have been here today, you want a certificate, and then I'll send that to you. And yeah, that's it. Okay, so let's get started. And in the meantime, yeah, feel free to type where you're from. So we already see that there are people from Nigeria and Qatar and the Emirates and obviously the UK and the US. So that's pretty cool. We're very global, very international this evening, which is, I know being online is not as fun as seeing people in person, but like Zambia, that's nice. So, but it's always good. We can always have like people from all over the world joining together and learning together. All right, so let me start by sharing my screen and showing you this presentation. Okay. Okay, so my name is Flavia, and I am the Chief Scientist at Seneca. Seneca is an online learning platform that is used by over 6 million people around the world. So we are based in London, we are based in the UK, but we have Seneca available almost anywhere in the world. You can always access it and use it with your students. And we have everything that we do is based on neuroscience, and cognitive science is on evidence. So everything we have is scientifically proven to work. We don't guess things that we do. We always have a scientific research basis to do what we do. And we currently have, like I said, over 6 million people using Seneca all over the world. We have been given 99% approval from staff in the UK in a research that was done by EduRio last year. So we're very happy with that result. It means that people really like Seneca and really use it with their students. So I'm just telling you that because if you want, I really recommend you just go on the website and just have a look and explore. Obviously, you don't have to use it, but it's really cool and it's free. So I really recommend you going there and checking it out. So in terms of content, we cover content all the way from primary to A level. And the courses are all exam board specific and written by senior examiners. So if you're teaching AQA or EdExcel or OCR, you're going to have courses specifically written for those exam boards. So it's really good. It's very specific. It's very detailed, and it's perfect for everybody all the way from primary to A level. I'll be sharing this presentation with you later on, so you can click on all these green buttons here to see more details. We have global recognition. So like I said, we are based in the UK, but we are recognized as well by entities all over the world, including people in Brazil, in the US, and other places. And in the UK, we have recognition by the DFE, BBC, Geographical Association, the Council of British International Schools, and others. And 2 years ago, we were given the Global Impact Award by EdTechX, which was really cool as well. And then, like I said, everything that we do is based on research. So we did have a randomized control trial conducted with over 1,000 students. And this showed that Seneca, students that use Seneca, improve a lot more than students who don't use Seneca. And that's because everything that we do, like I said, is based on neuroscience, is adaptive, is intelligent. It really works to improve students' attainment compared to the control groups. I can send you this if you want, or actually just click on the green button here. You'll have access to the full PDF so you can read about the study as well. And so in terms of the student platform, we have a student platform, a teacher platform, and a parent platform. So the student platform, the main thing is that it is an adaptive system. Don't know why the video is not loading, but you'll be able to see everything when you go there. But it's a truly adaptive system. So Seneca has an algorithm, an intelligence algorithm, that keeps track of students' answers and then selects new questions for them individually according to how they are progressing. So you know that all of the students, they don't learn at the same time, the same way, the same rhythm. So Seneca adapts and adjusts and optimizes learning for each of your students in real time. So it's a truly adaptive learning platform. And it's also fun. We use a lot of GIFs to make it more interesting, more up to date with how students like to learn nowadays. And then on the teacher platform, what we have is a very easy way for you to keep track of students' progress. So we do have a big focus on data, and that's why also we're doing all these webinars about data, because it's something that we focus on as well. And the idea here is that you set assignments to your students, everything will be automatically marked, and you receive this very nicely detailed, insightful report about everybody in real time. So the moment that they finish with an assignment, you get to see how they are doing, first attempt, last attempt, average, best, worst, time on the platform, everything you get to see straight away on the app. And the parent platform is actually brand new. We just launched it maybe end of the year, like November or October last year. And it's a very, again, easy and free way for parents to keep track of their kids' work. And parents like that, and it's also good for you because you don't have to keep reporting to parents everything, because they can just go here and see everything that's happening straight away. So we have all of those features for students, for parents, and for teachers. And we also have everything that I said here is free. So students, parents, and teachers can use Seneca for free. And we also have an extra layer of things, which are premium features that are for whole school data. So if you are a senior leader or a head teacher and you want to keep track of everything that's happening in your school, divided by student, class, subject, department, year group, key stage, or even target group. So if you have pupil premium, English as an additional language, any of that, you can do that. We can synchronize Seneca with your management system. So then all of the accounts, all of the passwords, everything is managed by your IT system, IT department. And then you get to see everything that's happening with everybody in your school, divided by different age groups and target groups as well. So it's a really, really good tool for intervention. So to help you define the best intervention for your students in different groups. So if you want to know more about that, again, you can click on all of the green buttons here. Yep, there's a tutorial, but I'm not going to go through that now. So I'm going to show you, I'm going to send you this presentation in the end together with Kyle's slides. So please do check it out. It's a really good platform. I'm not just saying that because I work there. I have been with Seneca since the very beginning, since before we even had anything. So if I didn't really believe in the product, I would have left by now, and I'm still there because I really, really like it. And it really has made a huge impact, positive impact in the lives of 6 million people. Cool. So I'm gonna stop talking and let Kyle start his presentation now. So thank you so much. I saw there, sorry, there are a couple of questions here about Seneca. I'll be answering them on the chat so we don't spend too much time on that. And then Kyle can start with his presentation. Okay, so remember to ask all of your questions on the chat so I can ask him them in the end. And if you are a Twitter user, if you are on Twitter, go on Twitter and use Seneca CPD as the hashtag, and then we can carry on the conversation over there. So if there are any questions that we don't get to ask here, you can tag Kyle. You can see his Twitter handle on the, on the blue bar there. And yeah, we'd be really happy to carry on with the conversation later on. Oh.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm somebody who's used Seneca for quite a long time as well. In my previous school, and I'm encouraging it across the schools that I work in now. It is absolutely fantastic. Whenever we got a really, really, really good kind of a set of progress scores a couple of years in a row in history, we just deliberately asked the students to see what they found was one of the most kind of useful things in it, and Seneca was overwhelmingly one of the key things that they mentioned in that. They like the fact, obviously, they can do it on their phones, so they can kind of do it out and about. They can do it in 5-minute, 10-minute bites. Plus the fact from a teaching perspective, because it's tailored to the exam boards as well, it means that you know that there's nothing irrelevant in there, and the questions are really quite clever in making them think about it in an exam format. So yeah, it's something that I would massively suggest, especially because you get so much out of it for nothing, and it's brilliant. So yeah, so I'm just gonna put that in before I get into anything else as well, just to kind of back it up.
Thank you, Kyle.
No problem at all. Cool. So yeah, thanks for joining me on a Tuesday night at 6 p.m. to talk about data. I always kind of say that nobody gets into data or gets into teaching to kind of to do data, really, do we? It's not kind of our main goal in there, is to look at, yes, I kind of want to go and look at progress scores. None of us do that, but I think it's one of the kind of the best things we can possibly do, really, as heads of department, as class teachers, as SLT, is to really mine into it and to kind of use it in the right way. I think can be really productive, really positive, and I think that's really, really key for what we're going to look at today. So a bit of background on me. My name is Kyle Graham, as you can tell from the handles everywhere. I am the Director of History across the Co-op Academy Trust. The Co-op Academy has 28 schools, primary and secondary. My role is across both. Previous to that, I spent 8 years in King's Leadership Academy in Warrington as first a history teacher, then a head of history there, and then the head of humanities. And that's kind of where I really kind of learned to kind of dig down into data in the way that I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about tonight. And yeah, I've got a couple of extra things for people at the end as well, in terms of, I know there's some blogs and stuff coming out on that as well, just to kind of, if you've got any questions though, please do feel free to obviously put them in the chat tonight, or indeed tweet me as well and use that hashtag Seneca CPD if you could as well. That'd be great. So, well, first of all, I mean, I'll skip on that. My goal today is to highlight the various uses of data kind of on a classroom and broader department level. Also to create ideas as to how data can be used effectively, because I think that there's many cases of people either being intimidated by data, and I understand that. I'm saying this as somebody who, I'm a historian. I'm not particularly mathematically minded at all, as a lot of my friends would probably laugh at the idea of that, of me being mathematically minded. But I also want to kind of get away from the idea that data, I think for a long time, I think in the profession has been used almost as a stick to beat people with. And there's maybe that perception that data is kind of like a dirty thing or it's an intimidating thing. And I'm kind of looking to kind of highlight that we can really use it really effectively to enhance what we do in a classroom. So I guess why make data a focus point is the first question here. And although it does have its flaws, and there's no doubt about that, I think it's very difficult to see data as being the be all and end all. And I know that like there'll be a lot of people who will do that, and there'll be a lot of places that will kind of put a great emphasis on data. I think it can be used for some high impact purposes if it's used appropriately. And I think a couple of them are, first of all, to see what topics we are most or least effective at teaching. And I think that's a really interesting one to do on a departmental level, but also on a personal level as well. And I'll talk about exam analytics in a little bit as well, but I think that's a really useful tool. A lot of exam boards have actually got an individual analytics tool. So for example, AQA, on their EAQA portion of their site, you can go into and you can dig down. And for example, in history, you can see which module are they performing worst on, which questions are they performing worse on. And indeed on Seneca as well, you've got a really, really clear data package where you can actually see that as well. And I've used Seneca for homeworks quite a lot as well for students, which I quite like. And you can see if they're struggling with certain topics or not. And you can kind of extrapolate things from that as you will. The second thing is to see what question styles, as I've said, we're most or least effective at teaching, because sometimes it can be the case where, oh, we're really good at teaching a certain novel in English, for example, but it might actually be that there's certain questions within that novel we're not so good at, or in history, it could be something similar. We could be really good at the longer essay questions, but we struggle with the kind of, with source utility questions, usefulness questions. Also, there's some ones that are kind of more widely used, such as what student groups do we need to focus on? So, for example, are we underperforming with our pupil premium students or our SEND students? But also the ones we can learn from. And that's a really key thing, because I believe really passionately in cross-department collaboration. So if say, for example, if my history department was struggling with pupil premium and English were doing really well with pupil premium, well, I'd want to go in and see what they're doing and kind of steal some ideas. Obviously, it can help us with seating plans, and it also helps us to plan with certain classes as well. So I'm going to take this in like a step-by-step thing. The first thing is just let's look at it in terms of how can we improve in the classroom with it then. And the one thing that I'll always say is with data is it's better for finding questions than answers. Because the second we start to use data to find answers is the second that we start to manipulate it to find the answers that we want, when the actual better thing to do is get a set of data in front of you and just ask questions of it and be as harsh as you possibly can be. Is this person getting a lower progress score, and I'll talk about that in a second, than this other person because of a certain module that they're teaching? Is it because of experience over time? How can that be kind of changed? So on a classroom by classroom, on a class scale rather, there's two obviously different ways of looking at this. You can look at progress. So progress is based upon their target. So say, for example, in secondary level, their targets at GCSE are set by what they got at Key Stage 2, largely. And students will have, it's generalizations, because usually it's like 6, if their target's a 6, it'll actually be like a 6.3. But say, for example, their target's a 6, and a student gets a 6, their progress score, generally speaking, although it's not an exact science in this way, because it's an average in the country, is going to be 0, because they've achieved their progress score. If they get 7 and their target's a 6, they've achieved a progress score of 1, generally. And obviously, the more positive it is, the better. But also attainment's a really useful thing to look at. So attainment is just the raw grade that they're getting. If they're getting if your class on average is getting a grade 0.5, then your attainment score would be 5, regardless of progress. I've always argued, and people can kind of say this in different ways, but I actually think that progress is the best way of looking at it. And there's going to be people who'll hate progress out there, and that's fine. But I quite like looking at it, because it doesn't matter if you've got a class who've got low prior attainment or high prior attainment. A progress score that's high means that that class is overperforming. A progress score that's low means that that class is underperforming. It's as raw as that. Now, there's obviously other ways of looking at this. Now, you'd want to kind of know what, generally speaking, is happening in the rest of the school. If your progress score is 0 and the progress score in the school is minus 0.5, then you're actually probably doing quite well, because you're overperforming the school's average by an entire half a grade. But anyway, on a class-by-class scale, when performance drops, say for example, and it's really easy because I think we're quite self-reflective and self-conscious as teachers, and we can sometimes beat ourselves up. But I think it's really, really good, again, to see what questions we can get from the data. So when performance drops, consider if that's because the content is harder, or if it's simply a topic that we might not know as well personally. So is the content harder? Have we changed something that's maybe not worked so well? Are there other factors, like, I don't know, absence, for example, is a big one, obviously, in the current climate of COVID. But there's lots of other things to consider there. What I would find really interesting in terms of reflections on this is, does it match up with the topics that you're the most confident on? So, for example, do you perform better on novels that you know more than ones that you don't? In history, for example, Germany has always been, teaching Germany from 1918 to 1945, well, 1890 to 1945 has always been a specialism of mine. Yet, over time, I noticed that my teaching of Elizabethan England got better. And the reason for that is I started to teach the Shooter's England A-level module, and that meant that my subject knowledge was being upskilled by having to teach it at GCSE. So that's, I think, a really interesting thing there. Another thing to kind of look at is I think a lot of the time, one of our roles as classroom teachers and as heads of department, and if you're in charge of teaching and learning, is to identify if we're putting things into our classroom, activities into our classroom because they're trendy, or because they're actually impactful. And we can actually look at the data a little bit for that as well, with a pinch of salt, as all data needs to be. But have you tried new activities or other pedagogy this half term, and has it been effective? How do you know? It might be good to see it over time. For example, retrieval practice, which is, I think, a lot of Seneca is really good for that as well. But retrieval practice is one of the kind of most impactful ways at ensuring that things get embedded in students' long-term memory. There's loads of different people you can look at for that. Like, there's some really good work out there by Kate Jones and Michael Childs on that. But it's a good way of checking effectiveness. Lee Donaghy as well, in teaching history a good while back, I think 2014. But also, if we're trying things, if we've put down, we're going to question the student more because they're off target or whatever the case may be, has their performance increased because of our intervention? Has targeted questioning moved them? Or has targeted question helped them? Has moving them in the seating plan helped them? And if not, then okay, well, maybe that's not working, or can I go and ask a different person about how well it's working for us as well? So, as I said, it's all about asking the right questions. That's the main thing here. It's not about necessarily, it's not necessarily going to always be about finding answers, because I think that's never going to work if you're going to do that. So, in-house questions, because I'm going to do this first. I think I'm going to go into the official data in a second, because I'm aware that at the minute we don't have official data to work with, do we? We don't have a set of GCSE results, and we haven't had since 2019. I'm going to talk about that because I want this to be kind of useful for the future. So I will talk a little bit about official data in a second, but I want to kind of really focus on the in-house stuff more. Because I think we should be taking our exam results for the last couple of years with a pinch of salt. Like, we're not comparing to national here. But in school, right, in school, are we as a department performing better or worse than other departments in the school? And I don't mean that just as a general progress score, as general attainment. I would say things such as, so just seeing some questions popping up. I'll get to them in a sec, folks. Thank you for them, though. I do appreciate that. When it comes to are we performing better or worse than other departments in the school, that could be with certain groups. High prior attaining students, low prior attaining students, special education lead students, English as an additional language students. And if you notice those trends, it doesn't matter whether, it's very easy sometimes to go, oh, I can't learn anything from maths, I'm a historian, or I teach English, or I can't learn anything from science, or I can't learn anything from drama or PE. But that's not the case. We can always learn from other departments. Like, for example, my modeling got significantly better for the low prior attaining students when I started to go and pay attention to what maths were doing. My students started to be far better at knowledge recall once I went in to see what science were doing with that. Science, who at the time were actually the first department in the school to use Seneca as well. So also, is there other reasons for that? Why might that be? Have they introduced some kind of policy that's worked that we could perhaps nab? And go and just talk to different people in the school, talk to the teachers, talk to the heads of department. Also have some policies we've trialed this year clearly worked or failed to work, and why? Can we steal policies or ideas from the high performing departments? Do they do revision or homework or exam prep or intervention differently than we do? It's always about these questions that we can constantly be asking. What do they do differently that we can take? Or what are we not doing that we could do? And then what's the impact? And that last question is so key. What is the impact? Because the way I look at things is, if something is going to have a 1% impact, but it's going to have a 15% impact on teacher workload, it's not worth doing, right? If something's going to have a larger impact on your workload than it is going to have on the student progress, then it's not worth doing at all. It might feel like it is, but it's not, right? So again, there's no, like, I know Seneca set this up, but I've not been asked to mention anything about Seneca here. But Seneca, for example, very easy to use, self-marking homeworks, because you just set quizzes on things. So, but it has a high impact. It's constant retrieval, right? So I would say that's something that's going to have a significant impact on student retention for very, very minimal workload. Very, very minimal workload. So it's massively worth it. Retrieval practice is another example like that. Questioning is another example like that. So yeah, are certain groups underperforming in their subject? Why may that be? Always ask why, and then go away. I think just create hypotheses and go and challenge them. And then how can you use information from these internal exams to assess the strengths and the weaknesses in the department? I don't think it's ever good to go away and go, our department's brilliant because of internal data. I think it's good to go away and go, what can we do better? What are we potentially doing okay at or doing well at? And then what can we try and improve on in the future? So as somebody who might just be starting with data, as I think a lot of people will be looking at data in a new way at the minute, because you're going to have to be focusing on the internal data a lot more than perhaps we have been in recent years, just because of I guess, a lack of external data to go on. And I think that the internal data system, there'll be systems set up within your school. So speak to your data manager, to speak to people within the school to see if they can extrapolate that. Every single time that you put in a set of results, you should be looking to see kind of what the patterns are. What's the average progress score of your department? How does that match up with the other departments in the school? Can you look at it on a class by class level? And I will show, in fact, you know what, I'll skip to it now to make it a bit easier to kind of see. These are kind of the examples of things that I'd be looking at, right? So say, for example, this is just a flat made up set of progress scores, right? On the left hand side, you can see the year groups, and then you see the different half terms. It's just based on progress score, because that's my main thing to look at. I'm not looking at attainment at this point. But you might look at the year 10s and you go, right, not performing very well in the first half term, get better in the second half term, worse again in the third and fourth half terms, but they do really, really well in half term 5. So it'd be really easy to look at that and go, right, we bounced around a little bit, which isn't great, but by the end we got there. The question I'm asking is, what are the different topics there? Is the topic in half term 5 a culmination of all of the previous half terms, or is it that it's an easier module? Is it that they've actually been focused on the same module for half terms 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then they started a new one on half term 5, so they're being quizzed on less content? Or have we set different grade boundaries? Because internal grade boundaries are always, they make data a little bit unreliable. Even when we try our very best, even if we say, I'm going to use exam board grade boundaries, well, unless they're sitting a full exam and it's being marked by examiners and externally invalidated, it's still going to need a pinch of salt in there. So, but then you look at the year 9 one, and the year 9 one bounces around less, right? So I'm looking at that going, that's probably more reliable data because it doesn't bounce around as much. But what you'd need to do is you need to go, right, well, let's go and look at the marking. Is the marking in that year 10 group, is that as strong? Is it as accurate? Is there a reason behind that? In the year 8 stuff, similar things, because the year 8 one bounces from a minus 0.75 progress score to -1, all the way up to 0.9, all the way back down to minus 0.2, all the way to, so that fluctuates a lot. If I'm teaching year 8, I'm looking going, what are we doing in half term 2 that is so much more difficult, half term 1 and 2, that's so much more difficult than half term 3, that's so much more difficult than half term 4. So why is half term 3 perhaps too easy? So, and these might not yield answers, but it's a good hypothesis to go on, because as members of, we should be constantly challenging ourselves to think about these questions. Then another breakdown that you'll do, or that I like to do, is, and I'll send Flavia actually a copy of a sample data sheet that I use, that I put together for every kind of data set that comes through. And this is, again, purely made up, but it's the boy-girl gap, because obviously you want that to be as close to 0 as possible. But if your boy-girl gap is actually positive, so say, for example, you've got a 0.5 boy-girl gap, that means the boys are overperforming the girls. So it'd be really easy to go, oh, it's a positive residual, brilliant, that's great. But what if you look at it again and go, actually, does that mean that the girls are underperforming? And that's a good reflection to have as well. Disadvantaged and non-disadvantaged gap, that's the biggest one at the minute, by the way. There is so much evidence, and I'm sure people are aware of this, but various lockdowns and COVID and absence has meant that the disadvantage gap has actually increased quite significantly across the board, across the country. And I would imagine that a lot of your internal data would suggest the same thing. So it's thinking about things that, how can we kind of upskill students in that way? How can we kind of close that gap as much as possible? There's no 100% answer. Again, one of the things that I'm asking a lot of the schools to do is to have a real focus on retrieval practice, to have a real focus on what was taught during lockdown. Can we go back over that? Can we have designated revision time for things like that? It's a really, really interesting thing to focus in on there, I think. It's a really, really big one. Then you've obviously got your low ability, it should be low prior attainment, middle prior attainment, and high prior attainment. And again, that's a really interesting one to look at. However, for both SLT and heads of department here, you don't have to generally report on data that contains fewer than 5 pupils. So say, for example, it's worth it to kind of bear in mind, but say, for example, you are in a high-performing, or a school with not high-performing school, because that doesn't match up at all with what I'm about to say. But say you're in a school that has high prior attaining students, right? So say, for example, you've got a bunch of high prior attaining students. You might only have a handful of low prior attaining students. So say, for example, say this is a set of, I don't know, maths data, right? And there's 4 low prior attaining students in this cohort. That could be completely skewing this data, completely skewing the data. You don't have a large enough pool to actually have an accurate portrayal here. And so that's why you might find these extremes, and you don't have to report on that. It's worthwhile looking and going, are we providing them with the education we possibly could do? But at the same time, it's another pinch of salt. And then the final one that I like to do is this. And this was what I always found really useful as a head of department. And again, this is where the progress score is really important. And again, purely fabricated. But on the right-hand side, you can see attainment. That's the average grade that class is getting. The progress score, and this is kind of what becomes interesting about it, because you can see between set 1 and set 2 there that set 2 are achieving a worse average grade, right? They're attaining a grade 5.8, so nearly a 6. Whereas set 1's actually attaining a grade 6.8, nearly a 7. So there's a full grade of difference between them, yet set 2 is achieving a better progress score. So they are actually the higher performing class at that particular point in time, because they're making the best progress. Similarly, between sets 3 and 4, they're attaining the exact same grade, but yet set 4 have got a smaller, set 4 have got minus 1.1. Still not a good residual. You want to have a much higher residual than that. Obviously, there's going to be different circumstances across different schools, but minus 1.1 to minus 1.8. And if I'm a head of department in this situation, I'm looking at this and I'm going, well, what can I do to support those members of staff? Is there a reason behind that? Also, really critically, have I got the right staff in the right classes? So it's all well and good sometimes saying, oh, I'm going to put certain people on oh, this person hasn't had a high ability class in a while. And I'm not a fan of that terminology anyway. But it's not necessarily about giving people classes as rewards, because I think that's been done. I've certainly heard of that being done before. It's better to have certain staff in certain places. The people who are probably the most academic and know the spec inside out and whatnot, have them at the very top, because they're the most likely to challenge you academically within your subject. So have the best mathematicians in your top set maths classes, right? But you'll also know that sometimes you'll have really strong mathematicians who just seem to do really well with the low ability students, because again, there's a real skill in being able to break things down in a way. It takes a real intelligence to do that, a real ability to do that. And you'll know where to put different people in different situations. And it's about that. It's making sure you've got the right players and the right thing. It's like a football match, right? You're not going to put a goalkeeper up front just because he hasn't played up front before. That's not how it works. So a couple of things that enable us to mine down a little bit further. And I've mentioned Seneca here as well. So you've got analytics tools provided by exam boards. As I said, EAQA have got a really good tool for that. And you can go into this. And what you can do is you can look at it on a module by module basis. And the key thing is here, and if you don't, when it comes to external data, this is the most important thing, because I'll give you an example. In history, the average percentage in AQA history for a medicine through time paper or Britain Health and the People paper is 40%, but the average for a Germany paper is about 50%. That suggests that the medicine paper is harder. So if you were getting 45% in both the medicine paper and the Germany paper, you're actually overperforming the national average on the medicine paper and underperforming it on the Germany one. So your Germany one is actually, on average, your weaker one. So always compare it to the national average. Always compare it to the national average to see where you're performing there. And I mean that on a question by question basis, because there will 100% be, when you mine down into it, there will be members of staff, including potentially yourselves, it's good to reflect on this, who are better at teaching some topics than others. Why may that be the case? How can you upskill them? Or how can you upskill yourself to be better at that? There'll be certain questions you might be better at. And it's not always just the harder ones or the longer questions. It could be a certain type of question, right? It could be certain novels. It could be certain areas of science. It could be certain areas of history. Like, it's one of those things, as historians, we always get it. If there's any historians in here and you've been to a pub quiz, I can guarantee you at some point, whenever there's a history round, people go, oh, you'll know the answers to all of this. You go, no, I don't know all of history. I don't know the dates of birth of all of the English monarchs. It's just not a thing that you learn. So I forgot what point I was making there, but I'm sure it was a wonderfully brilliant one. But anyway, it's one of those things, you're going to have missing gaps in your knowledge, and it's worthwhile knowing that. It's also the exact same thing for question styles. There'll be people who are better at teaching language than literature, for example. It's really broad. There'll be people who are better at explaining algebra than something else in maths. Trig. Don't ask me. Not done that for many, many years. But yeah, so it's worth mining down into that. And what you can do then, this is where the CPD comes in, is as a department, as a school, identify training needs as a result. If your department is doing worse at a certain style of question or on a certain topic, you need to do CPD as a department on making sure you're upskilling on that. Or if you're a one-man band or one-woman band, make sure you're doing the same thing, right? How can you upskill yourself? By doing reading, by reaching out to people, by doing CPD, whatever the case may be, departmental CPD, asking for help on things. Those are all of the things I would have a go and consider to try and upskill. And again, remember, it's about finding questions, not answers. And the worst thing that can happen if you get that question wrong and you go, and that's, oh, I didn't need to focus on that question, is you're just better at teaching it. That's the worst thing that can happen there, is that you're just better at teaching something. Right, that's ultimately what it's about. And again, a bunch of different questions. This is going to be the last thing I'll do, and then I'll give some time for some questions. Just again, some questions we should be asking. These are just example questions that I would suggest firing in. Have you used realistic grade boundaries? And I find that a lot of the times in schools, that's not the case. It's very difficult to create them. I try to make it an average myself personally of like on, above, and below. How similar are the results to last year? So if you compare, for example, a lot of people have done mocks. If you compare the mocks this year to the mocks last year, if they've done the same paper, roughly where are your students at comparatively? Are you happy with the progress they've made, or are they regressed? If they've regressed, what can you do about it? Because they've actually spent longer in school than some of the other people previous to that. If they've changed, why? Is marking accurate? How do you know? Have you made sure that you've went through the standardization process? Have you checked the marking of other people in your department? Have you checked your own marking? If your results based on progress scores have changed significantly, so that's up or down by 0.5, I would say is quite a significant change. Does that match where you feel the students are at? Because your attainment will change every year. You're never going to get 2 cohorts in a row that have the exact same targets. Ask students, has something been working or not working? It's not something you do all the time, but if you trust a certain group, ask them, oh, well, how did you feel whenever I did this? Was this helpful? Why was this helpful? What did this help you to do? And look in their books. The books is a clear thing of impact. What have you changed this year? Has it had an impact? What have you introduced? What have you taken away? Has it had an impact? And that is everything I'm going to go through. I could talk for days on this. I could talk for days on most things, to be fair. But I'll give people the opportunity to ask some questions. And there's loads more information. I've written 2 blog posts about this. I've written a little bit for Flavia as well, just in case she wants to add some things in. But yeah, I guess the last thing I'll possibly just show is I'll just show something here really quick. This is also something that I like to use, and this is just kind of a last thing. This is a data review sheet that I use, and it's just got some like sample questions for things that you want to have a look at. It's kind of got this baseline. It's not as large as it would be. It's got this kind of baseline thing for what you can add into. If you're doing it on exam data, you might want to look at your 4 to 9 percentages, 5 to 9 percentage. So these are all of your key headline figures, your class by class data, some considerations. Also, the peak in class variations are a really interesting one, because what you would do with that is you'd look at it and go, well, this class has got a progress score of 0.2, this class has got a progress score of 0.9, a 0.7 variation in class is quite large. How can you mine into why that's the case? And then you've got just the student group data and some general questions to go along with that as well. So I'll send this across to Flavia so she can send that across as well to for anyone if they want to use that and just make a copy of that. But yeah, that's everything I wanted to talk about anyway. But hopefully that was useful. I can see there's 77 comments on the side now, so that's intimidating, but I'll let Flavia deal with that.
No, that was really, really useful. That was really great. And there are a lot of comments, actually, a lot of people discussing as well what their schools use to define who is a low attainment student, where that data come from, if they're moving from primary to secondary or international schools, if they use different exam boards.
Yeah.
So there was some discussion about that. So we're going to get to that, but there are also some questions here that were asked in the beginning. So I'm going to maybe do chronological on
yes.
that. But first, thank you so much. That was really, really good webinar. So I think you saw that already, but cherries. Sorry. So what advice would you give someone starting to use this type of data? So they are a first-year teacher right now. So I guess not much experience at the moment. So I'm going to put that on them. So where to get started?
Yeah, I mean, we've all been there. Everyone kind of starts in a similar position. My first thing would just be is it can be really easy to get overwhelmed by it from at points. Like I certainly was at the very beginning. I would say certainly at times going to maybe speak to other colleagues who are really useful with that. Like I've had to go and get so much help when I want to just make like the simplest of spreadsheets. My brother, who is an actuary, laughs at me whenever I say, "Oh, look, I've got these things that automatically color code themselves." Yeah, I would just say is go and find the stuff in the internal system and just focus really heavily on, I guess, on progress and attainment. See if you can find gaps. But the main thing is is don't beat yourself up over what you find. Just use it to find questions and use it to kind of find things that you're then going to use in the future to go, oh, well, I'll use this to help myself out, or am I teaching this topic well enough, or is this accurate enough? Just base it on questions. Don't go seeking answers in data, because if you find what you're looking for, you might just have deliberately find what you're looking for, if you get what I'm saying. But yeah, there's always help out there in schools, and if there's anything specific that you want help with, obviously please feel free to message me on Twitter as well.
Yeah, good. These are good advice. So lots of people asking about how do you actually calculate progress score in your examples. So Leslie specifically asked when you were doing example 1, but I guess same for 2 and 3. So
yeah,
how do you calculate those numbers? Yeah.
So the progress scores that you'll see are, I mean, this is done in England. Well, it's done across the UK really, but the progress scores that you'll kind of see in there is, generally speaking, it's extrapolated from Key Stage 2 data, and usually whatever way that works out is it ends up being that they end up coming with like a 6.3 or a 5.4, whatever the case may be. So what essentially, if a student's targeted at 6.3, a lot of schools will round that up to making sure they've got a target of a grade 0.7, because if they get 6, they're actually on a minus residual. So that's kind of what that's kind of roughly there. But yeah, there's lots of different things to take into consideration there, and it's all done on like a cumulative thing. And yeah, there's some people posting in the chat there the specific attainment scores that actually lead to so low attainment score 80 to 99, expected is 100. So high attainment's above that's 101 and above. So that's kind of how it's calculated. Where those numbers appear from, you'll need to speak to your actual data managers and things, because what I'm doing is I'm working with data that I'm provided with, rather that I leave the getting the numbers out there for the far more intelligent human beings than I am. But your schools will have them. They have to have them, so they will be in there. You just need to ask them for it.
Okay, good. And I'm just follow up with a question from Penny here, which I think she's also international school, but maybe that's useful for everybody. She asked if the way you measure progress, or the baseline that you measure it against, is the same for all departments.
No,
like target groups.
Yeah. So for example, on the SATs for Key Stage 2, obviously your English SATs will directly impact your SATs for English. Your math SATs will directly impact your SATs for maths, I'm pretty sure. And then the other subjects are kind of extrapolated from that roughly. So not everyone will have a similar target score. But also schools have got a certain ability to do things themselves, if that makes sense. So there's lots of schools that do different things for that. They're still kind of tested around, like they're compared nationally on similar things, but some schools might decide that they're going to do internal exams, so like might do CATS tests are a really common one to do, and then use that with SATs to kind of do that. So it's a lot of different difficult things to do with that. You can, I would caution against doing baseline assessments in subjects like history and geography, and because you have to know that they've learned something in the first place. If you're doing a baseline assessment in year 7, primary schools do different curriculums. It's just as simple as that. So you're testing them on things they may or may not have learned. It's not an even playing field. So you could be going, oh, this student doesn't really, they're not good at history, in the same way that anyone can be good at anything like that. And it might actually just be that maybe they weren't taught the things you've been asking. So I would caution against baseline assessments. Yeah,
that makes sense. So let's go to Zara's question here, which I think it's a very 2022 question. But how can you use data to identify gaps in learning, particularly at the current situation where you still have a lot of students who can't come to school because of COVID and all the disruption from last year?
I think it's really important to do that. So I think it's a really, really good question. Yeah, very, very topical. So yeah, when it comes to things like that, I think it's important to do it on a group by group basis. So as I said, what you might find is that it might link with the national picture, which is when pupil premium students tend to be, the gap between non-pupil premium and pupil premium students is widened, in which case, what are you doing to provide something there for them? But also, it could be mining down into it on in a subject basis. So what topics did they maybe do during a lockdown? Can you see what kind of learning is being retained from there? But little things like retrieval practice. You might notice that the questions on a certain module that you've included in your retrieval practice might be more commonly wrong. Obviously, you can see that really clearly with things like Seneca, because it'll come up and it'll tell you the percentage that they've got in certain quizzes. And that's a really useful tool for that as well. So it's not just necessarily about kind of finding out individual student groups that might be underperforming, but also what topics are they underperforming in, and what kind of sections within topics are they maybe underperforming in. It could be just, again, from a purely history example. In the Germany module, they're doing really well on the Hitler's Germany section, but they're really struggling with the golden age of the Weimar Republic. So that'd be something to kind of look at, I would say. But I would definitely say at the minute, if you did teach something over one of the lockdowns, I would certainly see how I could fit in as much revision or retrieval on that as I possibly could do.
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion. Always good. Retrieval practice is always a very good solution for most problems. So I think there's a more pragmatic question here from Andy on how much doing all of this data analysis actually consumes time, your working time.
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. I think the answer to that is going to fluctuate depending on the school. So at King's Leadership Academy in Warrington, for example, we got sent out a really, really nice data package on a half-termly basis. And I was able to just extrapolate that and put it into my own thing and just look at it and answer the questions on it to an extent that it didn't actually take as much time as it could have done. I would say doing like the example of the data sheet that I kind of put out before maybe took like an hour or 2 hours to put together at the very, very most. And most of that is just because I was trying to mine down into it to ask more and more questions of it. You could probably have done it in 30 minutes because the package you got out was really, really good. But again, it'll depend about how accessible that data is, because obviously if you have to go into Sims or whatever your collection package may be and find the averages yourself, that's obviously going to take a lot longer, isn't it? So yeah, that's, I guess, maybe that from there.
Is there any, I'm just going to follow up. Nobody asked that, but I have been asked that before. In terms of being head of department or being SLT or being a class teacher, if the school is asking too much in terms of you need too much detail on data and that's taking too long, how can you deal with that? How can you talk to the leadership teams about that?
Yeah, that was a difficult question. Thanks for that.
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to know that because I've always been very fortunate with the teams that I've worked with, but I think it's about having open conversations. I mean, that's the most important thing. It's just going to them and go, look, this is, you've asked for this. How much time do you think this will take? How much time is realistic? Can you help me with this? Because the second that you ask for help with it and then you get somebody else involved in it, then they might realize, oh, actually, this is taking a lot more time. Is there a way of making this easier? But also, if you identify problems, like systematic problems within the school, sometimes it's something to look at and go, well, maybe if we raise this with somebody, it could be a really good project to improve on things longer term. But I think it's really important to be open. And if you don't feel that you can be open, then, I mean, are you in the right place, I guess, is the question there. So, yeah, that's that.
Okay, so let's go back to some more specific questions about data. And Leslie asked about internal grade boundaries. So she said she agreed with everything that you said, but how would you suggest to do that better?
Yeah, so it's a tough one, that one, because I don't think there's any right answer. I think whenever students are doing full mock exams, then by all means use the grade boundaries from that exact exam year. Obviously, if you're using a combination of different exams or it's not a full exam, then you'll want to, I would say, if you're not using the full exam, so say, for example, you're doing 2 out of the 3 modules, you need to raise the grade boundary. I always tend to be a bit cautious with grade boundaries as well. So what I did previous to COVID, it's not the same now because there's obviously many different factors. I used to always take the grade boundaries from whatever exam it was, or take the grade boundaries from the previous year and up it by 3%, because it's always better to err on the side of caution than, and they never really fluctuate more than 3% upwards. So you're always playing it safe there. When it comes to anything beyond that, I think it's difficult. I think you need to take an average of the whole score. Try and get it so that you're roughly working at about 0, I guess, or whatever the school's average would be for that subject. Because if all of a sudden, if your year 7s have got a progress score of 1 and your year 8s have got a progress score of minus 0.5, then that's where there's going to be a bit of an issue there, because you're clearly setting fluctuating grade boundaries. So try to have, I guess, I would say probably about 20% of your students above target, maybe 20 to 30% of students below target, and then kind of the middle ground is there for honor, working towards. There's no accurate way of doing that, but what you can do is, and I know that the King's Leadership Academy does this, is do it comparatively. So if you can use a quartile-based system, if you can set this up. So say, for example, in year 7, you've got students who are targeted at grade point 4 at the end of the year if you're using grade pointed targets. The students who get the top, so you just do it in quartiles. So the top 25% of students are above. Then you've got the middle 50% are on, the bottom 25% are below. Now, that doesn't mean that they are, really badly performing. It just means that those bottom 25% of students aren't performing as well as their peers who've got a similar target. Now, there's flaws and things in the system. There's by all means there is, but it's probably the most accurate way of doing it is to have internal kind of comparative reviews. I think that's the best way of doing that particular one, because if you're going to say, oh, my progress score is 1 in year 7, well, there's nothing to say that. There's no external exam there. You're not going to have exam boards doing it. You're not going to have moderation doing it. It's not going to work the same way. So internally comparative data is probably the best way of doing it, just so you can identify who are that bottom 25% in that grade point 4 target, and what can I do to kind of bump them up.
And so I'm just going to follow up with that. What kind of interventions do you think or have worked the best with your students to move those 25% bottom ones to higher up?
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes it's considering who they're sat with. Always feel free to move the seating plan if things aren't working behaviorally, if that's been an issue. The most important thing we can do is get in contact with parents. And I know obviously in some situations that's not going to work, but I actually find that's a really important way of doing it. And I think just sometimes just trying to engage. You're not going to win everyone over. Not everyone's going to absolutely love your not everyone's going to love your subject. It's not going to happen no matter how much we want them to. But getting in contact with home and just going, well, they're not doing this, they're not doing this, they're not doing this. I think it would be useful. And how can I help? Is there anything I need to know about? But also targeted questioning is really useful. Putting their books at the top of the pile to make sure you're marking their books first, for example, or checking their books first. Putting them at the front of the classroom just so you can check them more regularly. Those are just some things I would have a look at and have a think over. Is there other factors around it? Like, can you upgrade their language? Are you kind of, whenever they're verbally answering things, are they using quite basic language, and how can you upgrade that for them as well?
Okay, that sounds interesting. Sounds good. We have time maybe for one more question, so I'm just gonna go back to this one, which I'm going to expand into how could you best represent progress data in a chart on a graphic form, especially if you have to share that with other members of staff, so that they don't have to go and look through a 100-row table and they can see the main results straight away.
Yeah, thanks. We're getting more mathsy now. I don't know. You're needing some graph paper for this. It wouldn't work out well for me. I think there's loads of different ways of doing it. I think obviously you could just use straight up bar chart to see the different fluctuations in progress. That's really useful to do over the course of a year group. Also really, really useful to kind of compare different groups with. But I also think if you use a scatter chart, I think it's really useful. So you can see the students who are real outliers on either way. So students massively overperforming, and what are they doing that the students who are at the other end doing for example, are not doing? And what are you doing to make sure those students who are kind of real outliers in the scatter chart on the lower side, how can you bring them back up? Because sometimes, again, this is another one of the problems with data sometimes, is if your progress score is like 0.5, brilliant, but what about that student who's currently got a -1, who's a real outlier in that scatter chart? Just you can't rest on your laurels just with a 0.5. How can you get that -1 student right back up? And those are often the students who, if we do make that kind of breakthrough with, are probably the ones that we end up celebrating the most at the end of the year.
Yeah, exactly. All the progress that they have made.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think we will stop here because it's already 7, and that was how long we said we're going to be here for. But thank you so much. There were still a couple of other questions here, but everybody, please just go on Twitter and tag Kyle, so his handle is there, and I'm going to put this banner back there. So thank you so much, everybody, for being here and joining us. We had almost 200 people watching this live, and I know lots of more will watch it, the recording. So to watch the recording, to share this webinar with your colleagues, it's the same YouTube link. So the video is immediately being recorded and will stay here. I don't know how it works exactly, but it will be there immediately as soon as we're done. So you can use the same URL that you see on YouTube to watch this video again, to share with your colleagues who couldn't be here live. And yeah, you'll always be there on YouTube for you to watch again and share with other people. So thank you so much for coming here. Go on Twitter and share your thoughts about this talk. Ask more questions to Kyle. Get in touch with me if you want to know more about Seneca. And thank you so much, Kyle. That's been really, really great. I think everybody really liked it, and there are lots of thank you coming up now. So you can see there on the comments bar there. So thank you so much, everybody, and I hope you have a nice evening. Bye-bye.
See you there, folks.